Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome back to GH First Media. This is an update on the Kenyan tax protest. This is a protest being carried out by the Kenyan population, the majority of the population, against the tax bill by the government. It is a contentious finance bill, a bill that was passed by the government but in contention by the majority of the people. According to Al Jazeera, the protesters gained access to parliament and set portion of the parliament on fire, and the number of the protesters were shot and killed by security forces by firing live ammunition into the crowd. Now, this is a message to William Ruto, who was just elected some 2 years ago. After being a vice president for about 8 years, gained to be elected as a president into office. Now, this is the thing. If a government is for the people and people are the government, a decision being made by you in authority, in a place of authority, should be something that favors the commoner on the street. So when a decision is being made and the commoner is saying no, whatever decision is being made does not favor us, therefore we are not in favor of it, the best thing for the government or you in authority to do is to retreat, withdraw it. Now you have seen thousands, hundreds of thousands of people hitting the street, not just in Nairobi but other cities of the country, hitting straight to demonstrate against this particular bill. It tells you how unfavorable people have considered this to be to them. According to the people, you have taken office in 2 years. Some of us have really lauded your administration, but it looks like the commoner on the street are not feeling same. They are experiencing some level of hardship that is calling on you, the government, to do the needful by retreating or withdrawing this particular bill. But you persisting and moving this into being an act or a law is going to cause a chaos in your government. But unfortunately, in my opinion, His Excellency William Ruto was heard to have attributed this protest to some criminals that are hijacking his government. It doesn't really make sense how African leaders think. When the people protest against a policy, quickly they turn it against, or they turn it around to blame a group of people or attribute it to some hijackers somewhere. It doesn't make sense. Instead of them sitting down to analyzing situations to say, okay, people are not in favor of this decision, they tend to shift the goalposts by blaming some group that does not even exist. This is what he said, saying legitimate protests against his policies had been hijacked by a group of organized criminals. He warned his government would use all means at its disposal to prevent a repeat of the violence at whatever cost. Come on. You know what the government can do to avoid this violence is to retreat, is to withdraw the bill. It is just that simple. His Excellency William Ruto, listen to the people. That is what governments do. Listen to the people, withdraw the bill, and you will have peace in your government. If the people do not have peace, your government does not have peace. This is not good for your government, not good for Kenya, not good for the image of Africa. So you withdraw that bill and let your country have peace. Let us now listen to Al Jazeera reporting live from Nairobi on developments of this current protest in Kenya.
Who's now in Nairobi. Malcolm, I know that you've managed to get to us on camera. Just explain to us where you are and what you're seeing right now.
So we're just outside the Parliament building in central Nairobi. It's there, but first going to talk about what's down the street. We can see remains of a burning roadblock there. Beyond it are demonstrators who are chanting and shouting. There's a church to the left. Some demonstrators are in there. Some of the churches announced earlier today that they would host medics ready to support demonstrators who were injured during the protest. These are some of the big churches in the city centre, which is one of a growing number of voices who to varying degrees are expressing support for the people on the streets. Now around us here we can see groups of uniformed police, some carrying weapons for tear gas, of which a lot has been fired. There's also many plainclothes security operatives around carrying guns, and we saw some of them earlier shooting into the crowds, and just a short while ago, let's take the camera around this way, on the street just over there, just outside Parliament, was a body of a young man who was carrying a Kenyan flag. He had a bullet hole right in the centre of his forehead. His brains were spilled on the pavement. And this is one of a number of people who were also seen with gunshot wounds being carried away from here. Now that followed the demonstrators breaking into Parliament. Just over there you can see still the remains of where the fence was torn open. A police truck, appears to be a military truck, but it's of the type that the police use, is smouldering just outside Parliament over there as well. The demonstrators here are now chanting more. We've got a banner there that says "Enough is enough," and this is about ostensibly rejecting the finance bill, which is meant to increase taxes. The government says it needs to increase taxes to pay for its budget, to provide services and to keep up with debt repayments. And so this is the second year in a row taxes have been increased. The sentiment among the protesters is that they're not accepting that from a government that's widely seen to be deeply corrupt. Now there's an ambulance coming. We're going to have to ask the camera operator to step aside.
So while you move, Malcolm, while you move to one side, while you move to one side, while you move to one side and let that ambulance get through, we can see demonstrators coming towards you. Can you just give us the geography of where you are in terms of the Parliament building, the Senate and the Governor's office? Because we hear that the Senate and the Governor's office are also have been attacked. In what form, we're not quite sure yet. We're not seeing those pictures, but we certainly have seen the pictures from Parliament.
Yeah, and Parliament is right behind us. We can turn the camera around and take a look there quickly, just to see how close we are, and we can see that burned out police truck and these holes in the fence. This is where minutes ago we saw a dead body on the pavement. There were protesters right here just an hour or so ago. If we bring the camera back round, we'll see where the police have fought them back using tear gas, using water cannon and what appears to have been live gunfire, killing apparently at least one people and several others who appear to have been injured with gunshot wounds. Now these demonstrators, some of whom are coming out the church on the left, others coming down the street, being met with tear gas and flashbangs, stun grenades being fired by the police, but it's not deterring them very much. Clearly a lot of built up anger among these crowds on the streets. And whilst these demonstrations are ostensibly to reject that finance bill, one of the things you hear people cheering more than anything else is that Ruto must go. President William Ruto, who became president 2 years ago after being vice president for 8 years, it comes at a time with an increasing cost of living, and the government's basically asking people to tighten the belt yet again with these further increases in taxes. But it's a government that the demonstrators feel is deeply entrenched in corruption and patronage, and they feel it simply doesn't have the authority to collect more money from people when they don't trust this government to deliver services and not steal the money.
And of course, when the bill was proposed, Malcolm, it was proposed several weeks ago, but you might say momentum to protest against it has really ramped up a notch over the last 7 days, when the youth element of Kenyan society just basically said, we've had enough and we're going to have 7 days of rage. We're 7 days into these protests as such, and they've built up momentum. Just give us an idea of that momentum, but also can you give us an idea of how security is built up in the capital to counter the protests as well?
Well, it's escalated rapidly. We were standing right here just 7 days ago when the demonstrators tried to march to Parliament. They called the first demonstration. There's just a couple of hundred that day. They were broken up by police, dispersed using tear gas. And the demonstrators called for a return to the streets on Thursday last week, when the next sitting of Parliament was due to discuss the bill. That protest saw thousands of people in towns and cities across the country, about 20 different towns and cities, and very many people here in Nairobi. Police tried to break up the demonstrations using tear gas and water cannon, and at the end of the day, just after sunset, 1 or 2 people were shot dead. We saw video showing plainclothes security operatives running into the crowd, firing guns, in what appears to have been an attempt to clear the crowd at the end of the day. Now that prompted the demonstrators to declare 7 days of rage, which started at the end of last week, and they proposed all different kinds of activities, including people across the country to begin the process of recalling their MPs. The Constitution has a provision for recalling MPs who've been elected. It requires gathering about 30% of the signatures of the voters in any one constituency. Now, the instructions to do this have been translated into several of Kenya's different languages and distributed online to different parts of the country. It's a kind of mobilization that's not been seen in Kenya before, or certainly not for years. On Sunday, protesters went to churches, which are often frequented by politicians. President William Ruto attended a church. Many members of the congregation weren't allowed inside because the security forces evidently thought it could become overrun with protesters. So protesters chanted outside and booed his convoy.
And it does seem that those, and it does seem that security personnel
were unimaginable in what many people.
It does seem security personnel. Sorry to interrupt there, Malcolm. Obviously, there is a ring, a cordon, a security ring and cordon in front of Parliament, so that most probably those security personnel and that armoured truck that's just gone past really don't want those protesters that are further down the street to get anywhere near Parliament. I presume that's the strategy so far. As we hear more gunfire.
They're trying to keep them back.
It seems.
We can just see someone firing what appears to be a shotgun, firing it towards these young people. We've seen someone drop down on the street. If we turn the camera to the left, we've seen the demonstrators coming out of the church on the left, holding their hands up, kneeling. And there's an ambulance there just pulled out of the church.
Yeah, we'll have to actually get you to describe the pictures, Malcolm. Obviously, we can't show those sorts of images due to, you might say, international television rules under Ofcom, but that's those are the rules that we have to abide by in terms of taste and decency, and certainly at time of death. Obviously, horrific situation unfolding where you are. Obviously, security personnel very heavily armed, Malcolm. Just if you can visually describe what's going on, where those protesters were and where they are right now. Is there a church nearby? You were talking about churches and places of sanctuary for those that might be injured.
Yeah, this is all taking place just outside a church. Now, we don't know if the person lying on the ground was injured, unconscious, or dead. Indeed, as you said, we've taken the camera away. But there are people now gathering around that person lying on the floor. And this is just outside, indeed, a church. So since there's a crowd around the person lying on the floor, the camera's moved back in that direction. And just to the left of there, we can see the entrance of a church. Now, this morning, some church leaders said that they would host injured people in the churches and have some medical services inside these large city centre churches, which is one of the many growing forms of expressions of to varying degrees support for these protests that have erupted very quickly, all really in the last 7 days, with clearly many institutions, churches included, feeling to varying degrees that the people on the street have a point. And this does come after a cost of living crisis that's the cost of living's been going up on and off ever since the global pandemic. Corruption and misspending, or certainly the perception of that's going on, has been a problem in Kenya for generations, but is perceived to
Malcolm,
have escalated.
it has to be said. I'm sorry, I don't really mean to. I don't want to.
The current government, the government of President William Ruto.
Malcolm, I don't want to interrupt too much because obviously you want to give us background, and that's absolutely crucial at a moment like this. But obviously, we're seeing a lot of photojournalists around you. We're also seeing a lot of noise to the left. We presume protesters. They want to face off against, it seems, that line of security personnel. How many security personnel are we talking about that are behind you there?
We can see dozens and dozens here around Parliament, but we've seen many more going towards other parts of the city. Now we're seeing police try to break up this very small group of demonstrators who are trying to approach Parliament, swiping at them with batons. We've just seen people firing weapons in the last few minutes. But then, yeah, there are numerous water cannon around. Some have gone down the street. There's another one just parked behind us. And then we saw 2 trucks of men in military uniforms with helmets and Kalashnikovs also driving into the crowd. We don't know if they belong to one of Kenya's paramilitary police units or which part of the security agencies they belong to. I mean, we've also seen scenes of, for example, one of the policemen dressed in this riot gear giving water to a protester a short while ago, and other signs that there are also some expressions of sympathy from the police officers themselves. We've heard protesters chant things like, "We're doing this for you," as well. The rank and file of the police are not highly paid, and those wages go for everyone in Kenya less far than they did just 1 or 2 years ago. Everyone's feeling the pinch to varying degrees, and so there's expressions of sympathy from the protesters to the police.
It is a very tense situation there, isn't it, both for protesters and
coming out saying things like, "We're doing this for you, we're doing it to help you."
Yeah, it's a tense situation, isn't it, for both protesters, who we can see appealing most probably, it seems, to the security services there, who are keeping their distance, even though they are heavily armed. There was a suggestion by one of our contributors just a short time ago that if the situation did get worse, the president has the ability to call in the military. And as the evening, we're mid-afternoon now, but as the evening progresses and the sun sets, there might be a bit of concern about security around the capital in general.
Well, the Internal Affairs Minister speaking yesterday said the demonstrations wouldn't be allowed, or were not allowed to carry on past, just seeing someone else being carried away there. Don't know if they're injured or not. The Internal Affairs Minister said the protest could not carry on beyond sunset. Now, last Thursday, it was just shortly after sunset that we saw those videos showing plainclothes security operatives firing weapons at the crowd, and then the crowd was broken up in the early hours of the evening, just shortly after nightfall. So yeah, we're waiting to see what will happen when the sun sets here in just over 2 hours from now, and if the demonstrators will try and stay around, or what kind of force the police might use to break them up. But the government then, I think, finds itself possibly between a rock and a hard place in terms of how to deal with this, because many of these demonstrators, certainly not all, but very many, they're young people who are relatively educated, living in the capital, people who are using smartphones, live streaming everything on social media, and so the amount of visibility for these protests has been significant, especially compared to the initial number of people, just a couple of hundred 1 week ago exactly, when we were standing right here. But with that use of technology, social media platforms and smartphones, it's become very visible very quickly. And so some of the rights abuses that we've seen in the past committed by security agencies against demonstrators, for example, in slum areas, to which there's relatively little outcry or repercussion if small numbers of protesters are killed in such circumstances. But the reaction now is very different. And what we saw when many people were arrested exactly a week ago, that the Law Society of Kenya came out and declared it would help the protesters. We saw dozens of lawyers flocking to police stations to push for the release of those detainees. Now the government appears to have continued to try its crackdown. There have been reports of several prominent social media campaigners and activists being abducted by people in plain clothes last night. There have been several cases of this reported over the last few days, but in each case of somebody going missing or being seen being abducted by people in plain clothes, the hashtags erupt online calling for that person to be freed. And certainly at the end of last week and over the weekend, all of those who were detained were released within 24 hours, although we understand about 7 or maybe more prominent social media activists.
So Malcolm, let me just interject there just for a moment.
But for the government, then if they detain these people, it causes an outcry, but then they feel that if they release them, that these people are leading the protests. But the reality is these protests don't really have a leader.
No.
Sorry,
And Malcolm, in the week of protests that we've seen over the last 7 days, you will have spoken to a whole range of people, young people, shopkeepers, housewives, businessmen, politicians. Let's just begin with the rank and file public, who have found the cost of living just unbearable. Can you just give us a case history of the type of person you have been speaking to, and the real problems that they're facing, which is the heart of this issue right now, and why we're seeing people on the streets, and why we've seen people shot and injured in Kenya and in its capital, Nairobi?
Well, among the people we've spoken to, it was included people who are in their late teens, who've just finished school, thinking about their futures, planning to go to university or looking for jobs. We've spoken to people in their 20s, 30s, even 40s, including professionals, lawyers. A guy we spoke to last week is a public relations professional, and others that we're speaking to as well. The demographic supporting this is quickly, appears to quickly be growing much broader. We've had videos going viral on social media from people in their middle ages saying we should support our children. It's been described online and in traditional media, by traditional media here in Kenya, as Gen Z protests, referring to the many young people who are among the demonstrators, but it appears from the start to have actually been much broader than that, and quickly growing broader by the second as these messages further spread both online and here on the street. So what's being called simply a Gen Z protest does seem to have a much bigger backing. We were talking a minute ago about the leadership. It doesn't appear to have leaders, and that's something I think that's proving challenging for the government. People online have been joking about the fact that the security agencies are trying to find out who's paying people to demonstrate, and the joke that's being made is around President William Ruto and his government, according to the campaigners, not understanding that people sometimes do things without being paid. As the protesters allege, and there's certainly a widespread feeling that everyone there in Parliament is doing what they're doing because of political benefits, because of patronage, or because of direct bribes.
Well, that was from Al Jazeera. Stay tuned with us as we get you the latest update on the protest in Kenya. We shall get some people from Kenya to give us a live feed on whatever is happening in Kenya, Nairobi, and other cities in Kenya. Stay tuned. This is J First Media.